Exactly.
3 days after retiring.
Right.
This is great. It's so good to see so many people on, for this training. I know Diane's probably going to say the same when she gets on here. And, this is something that we've been talking about for a while. So we're excited that everybody's joining, and we're going to record it too. So anybody that isn't here, could always watch it or take a look later.
Thanks very much for facilitating that. This is terrific.
Yeah. So Tony, so this is not really a requirement, but advisable. And then the one that is requirement is the ethics, the online ethics thing we have to take. Now, the ethics one, is that every year?
It's every 2 years you have to take the course, the online course. And then, but in between that, there's a acknowledgement of receiving the summary that you just signed probably recently. So open meeting law training is something that we require for all new appointees or elected officials that are subject to the open meeting law. But there isn't, unless Lauren corrects me, there isn't actually a yearly or every 2 years. There isn't anything about how often you have to revisit that. So this training is not a requirement for those of you that have already taken it, but it's something that we wanted to do anyways because it's always good for a refresher.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Tony, and hello everyone, I'm Lauren Goldberg. There is a requirement that the clerk distributes members of boards and committees when they're elected or appointed, that they get a copy of the open meeting law and the AG's guide to the open meeting law.
Right.
Which I do think now people have been doing by Zoom. I mean, not by Zoom, by email.
So for everyone on the phone, I know Diane's jumping on in a minute too. Everyone that's on here, Lauren Goldberg is from KP Law, our counsel, and I'm sure you could probably do this training, blindfolded. She presents this training at clerk conferences. I think I've heard it at an MMA conference in the past. And really knows her stuff. So we are very excited to have Lauren here for this. Hi, Diane.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
How's everybody? First, I want to thank you all. Oh, should we wait or?
No, I think it's 6:33. I would say, put yourself on mute. I'm sure Lauren will welcome any questions while we are in the middle of the training. So you can just unmute yourself if you have a question, but to prevent some of the feedback during the training, it probably makes sense to put yourself on mute. So go ahead, Diane.
Okay. First, I want to thank you all for volunteering on the specific committee that you're on, and appreciate that you volunteer and take your time to make this town a better place, and taking time yet again tonight to come to this OML open meeting law training. I can guarantee you that whether you've worked 30 years or 3 days, which we have some, you will learn something new about open meeting. I've been to several of Lauren's training sessions, and she's amazing, and it's always a learning experience. So thank you very much. I just want to say for one, on a note, again, whether you've been here 30 years or 3 days, there are no silly questions. We're all here to learn, so please don't be afraid to ask a question. Lauren's going to take the questions as they come unless it gets too cumbersome, and she'll let us know whether she's going to either answer that question in the future or of our presentation, or we'll save them to the end, or she can address them as we go along. So without further ado, Lauren Goldberg, take it away.
Well, with that kind of introduction, I mean, I can be here all night, no problem. Diane, are you gonna authorize me to screen share, or Tony? I don't know who's in charge of the screen sharing.
I just did. I think you have tried, give it a try.
Okay, that's good. Let's see. So weirdly, all right, hold on one sec. Let's go back over here. See, this is not supposed to happen, but because I'm involved, this happens. Always. My prowess with Zoom. All right, we're gonna have to use the old one. Not the old, let's see.
Do you have it, Tony? Is it something you could put on the screen? Is it your presentation, Lauren?
Yes, is that, can you guys see that or no? No. One sec, let me, I'm almost there, I promise.
I have it up now on my side, you know, if you
Okay.
want me to share my screen. and
Sure.
then you can just tell me when to,
Tony, that would be awesome. Who knew I was gonna get my own slideshow?
Personal video helper.
Mhm.
all right, let's see.
Yay.
All
So
right.
from beginning on the left, yes. That's it.
Okay, how's that?
Perfect. Okay, we can go to the next slide. I do want to note that I put public records resources. They should be at the end in case anyone wants them. And of course, we have more materials if needed. All right, we can go to the next screen. This is the disclaimer that says, yes, I'm a lawyer, but I don't know the particular issues that you're dealing with right now. And so I'm giving general advice, not legal advice. Okay, so as everyone probably already knows, there's really three parts to the what are called the transparency laws or the sunshine laws. And those include the open meeting law, as I know that no one's surprised about that. And basically it says the public can only conduct its business in public unless an exemption allows an executive session, and those are limited and narrowly construed. Under the public records law, essentially all records made or received by a public entity, appointee, elected official, et cetera, is a public record subject to mandatory disclosure, again, unless there's a limited and narrowly construed exemption that applies. And then finally, the conflict of interest law, and that's essentially to make it so that when a person is acting as a town official or a town employee, they have the town's interests at heart and not any kind of personal or private interests. All right, so if you get nothing else today from this training, this is what you absolutely have to know. All communications between a quorum of members of a board must occur at a properly posted meeting. And what do I mean by that? I mean that meetings can include social media postings, well, meetings that shouldn't occur could include social media posts, emails between members, or just discussions. So any communications between a quorum have to occur at a properly posted meeting. All right, so these are some of the definitions. Obviously, everyone knows how to read. The important thing, again, is to recognize that these are all terms that have the other terms we're talking about within them in some cases. So a quorum, for those of you who don't know, is a majority of the full complement of members. And that means not just the number of members that are in office, but of the number of members of the entire board. If you're on the Conservation Commission, you might say, wait, we have an exception. And it's true, there are exceptions. But in general, a quorum is a majority of the entire board. So you need to have a quorum present for it to be a meeting. And then a meeting is defined as a deliberation amongst a quorum. So if you're talking amongst your fellow board members and you're talking about town business, and there are a majority of you on the board there, then you need to be at a meeting. If you do not, at a posted meeting, if you think, oh, gee, this isn't anything, we're at a Christmas party. If you start talking about the actual business of the Conservation Commission, and I'm sorry to pick on them, then that turns into a meeting in violation of the open meeting law. So a deliberation amongst a quorum about the business of the body. Okay, and then a public body, the one thing I want to point out is that subcommittees are also subject to the open meeting law. So if you are on a committee and that committee creates a subcommittee, the subcommittee is also subject to the open meeting law. They need to post, they need to take minutes, and they need to make the meeting available in real time.
Hey, Lauren, can I present the first curveball to you? Curveball
Okay,
question?
if it's a hypothetical.
Hypothetically,
Yes.
if we had if we had some committees in town that when they were created, the enabling language says anywhere from 7 to 15 members, which number are, when we're talking about constituting a quorum, which number do we have to abide by?
So that is a really good question. What I suggest is that at the time when the board is done with its appointments, it says this shall be a 7-member board for purposes of the year 2022 or for the term of this appointment until next year's election or something like that. And that way we know. Otherwise, we get into that situation where we don't even have enough members appointed to constitute a quorum of the entire board. So I would say have the appointing authority declare the number for that year's appointment.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, we can go to the next slide. All right, so there's 3 main things under the open meeting law. 1 is providing adequate notice. We're going to talk about that. 2 is listing the proper purposes. And then, especially if you're going to go into executive session. And then 3 is the minutes and what should be in them and how they should be approved. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about a meeting being defined as deliberation amongst a quorum. And so that makes certain things difficult. It makes things difficult for a board member to send out a meeting agenda or, scheduling questions or documents that people might need for an upcoming meeting. It also makes on-site inspections very difficult, especially because the ADA says that all meetings have to be accessible. And then attendance at a public or private gathering or social event. This is my example of the Conservation Commission in the kitchen at the Christmas party, as well as a posted meeting of another body. And in each of these, the law was drafted to exclude these from the definition of a meeting. But the most important line is the first one, provided no opinions of the governmental body are expressed. So if an individual is going to send out a I'm sorry, if an individual is going to send out an individual board member information, they should just send that out and not ask for responses, right? Because if they ask for responses and there's a substantive response, now it's a violation of the open meeting law. It went to everyone. They could send the agenda, they could send scheduling or procedural information or other people's reports or documents. And that language, it says, as long as the material does not express the ideas, feelings, beliefs, and opinions of a member of the body. So sharing your own opinion amongst a quorum by email is a violation of the open meeting law because it constitutes a meeting. So as long as you don't express any feelings, ideas, beliefs, and concerns. So what does that mean? It could be Diane is on the board of registrars and Diane sends out an invitation saying, I'd like to schedule a meeting on Friday. We expect a blah, blah, blah petition to come in, period. If someone writes back and they say, they give an opinion, well, I'll be, I never expected that petition was actually going to be circulated, let alone filed. So that's feelings, ideas, beliefs, and concerns. A person can write back and say, I'm unavailable or I am available, but no sharing about content. Same thing with meeting agendas. I can email the chair and say, can you put this on a meeting agenda? But if the chair writes back and says, if we have a 3-member board, great idea. So glad you wanted to do this week. Now, it's feelings, ideas, beliefs, and concerns. Yeah, this is something we need to deal with. So it really seems like a bunch of fine lines, but if you follow the same rules every time, it's usually easier to manage. So don't use email to talk to each other to the extent possible if you're on a board. If you do use email to go back and forth with anyone, just do it with one other person. And this is if you have a 5-member board. If you're on a 3-member board, you can't talk about business outside of a meeting, a posted meeting, because you're a quorum. So, okay, attendance at an on-site inspection. We all know boards and committees have to go out for site inspections. They like to go together. Sometimes they drive together or, meet there, whatever it might be. There is no requirement that meeting be posted because it's not deemed a meeting for purposes of the law. Nearly every clerk that I know has suggested, and I think most public bodies do, post an informational notice. We're going for an on-site inspection at whatever the address is. We will meet back at this office for a blah, blah, blah meeting thereafter. So that's one of the ways that you can talk about what you see at a site inspection, but not actually do it. The next is attending a party. You can do it and you can all be in the same room, but you can't talk about anything that is before the board or that might be before the board. That can be hard, just like all of these things. And then the last one is attendance at a posted meeting of another public body. And where there's only communication amongst the members by open participation, meaning that the member of the visiting body stands up and, gets in line to speak the same way that anyone else would. They don't get special treatment or special access. They're just regular attendees at a meeting. And what is deliberation for this purpose? Deliberation for this purpose is looking at the other members of your board and saying, that's what we think at least, right? It's that right? You're deliberating. So if you have a board that's very chatty, then I always recommend posting a meeting for the exact same time with the same agenda so that you have an opportunity to speak about your thoughts without violating the open meeting law.
Lauren,
Yes.
I did get a question if you want me to do it this way. If it's not a formal subcommittee, but just some individuals who constitute less than a quorum, who meet to talk about a matter, work on a document, etc., that will be brought back to a noticed public meeting, does that meeting of less than the quorum have to be publicly noticed or posted?
Okay. So we are going to talk about that later. I'll talk about it now and skip that later. Essentially, The answer is, and this is every time, once a meeting, I have to do it. It depends. And the reason it depends is how informal is informal. Let's say we have a 5-member board, two of the members just want to get together and prepare a draft. They don't talk about it at the meeting or anything, but they get together and they work on that. And then they present it in the future. That is not a subcommittee for purposes of the open meeting law, because they have not been authorized to act together. If, however, the board voted or, had consent, agreed consensually that 2 of the members would work on this together, in theory, at least, that is a public meeting subject to posting under the open meeting law. And I know there can be a lot of gray areas, but, the finance committees have to deal with this a lot because they're a liaison to a particular board or committee. And so, they want to bring the information back and provide information about it, or maybe 2 people want to. And so as long as 2 people aren't formally authorized to do that or designated to do that, another member of a board can go to another board's hearing as long as there's no deliberation at that meeting. So it's not a violation of the open meeting law. It's not a subcommittee. It's just a get together of a few people. Second, you hit a quorum though, that's where the problems start. And I always suggest you kind of think about approaching this from a best practices point of view. I should have started with that. Certainly, there's violations of the open meeting law that we can hope to avoid, and that's best practices versus us having to defend an allegation of a violation. So to avoid a violation, if you are in a group that is less than a quorum, let's say there's 9 of you and 4 of you are together, if even one of you talks to another person on the board about what the 4 of you did, that's a violation of the open meeting law. It's a deliberation outside of an open meeting because it can also be sequential in nature. All right.
So-
I just wanted to make a quick point about item number 4 on the screen. I think this is something that there's been some confusion about in town here. And maybe we've been overly conservative, but as an example, the Board of Selectmen is 3 people. So according to item number 4, it would be okay for 2 members to go to, for example, a Conservation Commission meeting. And as long as there's no deliberation amongst the select board members, that's okay. Is that a true statement?
That is a true statement. In fact, a quorum, all of them could be there. You could have 3 members there. It doesn't matter as long as you do not deliberate at that meeting. I think the next slide talks about some tricks and tips to try and avoid violations. So maybe Tony could move the slide. I'm so sorry that so here we go. The first one is, if you're attending a meeting of another body or a social event, you don't want to create an appearance that you're violating the open meeting law. I always recommend sitting apart from one another. I recommend coming in cars that are different, getting yourself to the meeting. If there is likely to be a person who insists on speaking and says, we as the board, blah, 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 and it can be any board, then it's better to just post and have 2 posted meetings at the same time with the same stuff. That way, if there is deliberation, whether it's accidental or otherwise, it's not a violation. I think oftentimes we say, offense is the best defense, right? And so by not putting yourself in a situation where it looks like you could be violating the law, you're better off. So go by yourself, sit by yourself, don't whisper with fellow board members, even if it is about someone's, kid or exciting job or whatever it might be, just avoid it altogether. For a site meeting, we always recommend that, because deliberation at a site meeting would be like talking to one another about what you're seeing, right? Did you see that? That pile of cuttings was in the buffer zone. That's a violation, right? And then I might not agree. I don't think it is the buffer zone. I think that's what should happen at a meeting. So I always suggest taking notes, bringing anything, drawing pictures, taking photographs, and bringing anything that you want to talk about back to a meeting posted right after that, so that you can talk about all of the issues that were raised. And then, this is one that was kind of in response to the earlier question as well. And that is, if you want to speak at a meeting and your other board members are there and you are speaking on your own behalf, say so, say so. My name is Lauren Goldberg. I am a member of the blank. However, I am here tonight as an individual. And then don't look to your fellow members and say, right? Because that's where things start going down the road. Otherwise, post that joint meeting. And then even if you say you're an individual, if you were to refer to the other board members and they responded, it wouldn't constitute an open meeting law violation.
So when, quick question on when you do a site inspection, you could post a meeting. I know we did, we did for a site inspection once where we posted the meeting was at the actual site. That is okay?
So I think it depends who you ask. And the answer that I would provide is that typically, just because someone wants to do something on their property doesn't mean that they're inviting the public to the property. So it really matters where it is. You can't have a meeting at a place where it is not accessible. So if it's, conservation on my mind, if we're like out walking on, wet earth, that's not going to be accessible for purposes of the ADA. So no meeting, no discussion. In comparison, boards often have meetings during like town construction projects. They meet at the site, they stand at the front, they talk about what's going on, or they go right into the, when it's nearer to completion, they go right into the front hall. That's different. As long as you're willing to let the public in, then that's okay. All right, let's try the next one. Okay, so I've already been harping on this, and I know it does sound like that, but essentially email is addressed specifically in the open meeting law. And so a deliberation includes a deliberation in an electronic format. So a quorum cannot use email, and I've said this, but hopefully it'll stick, to share their feelings, ideas, beliefs, or concerns, whether serially, meaning we get to a quorum because one person talks to the next, or emails to the next, or in a single email, which we all know, sometimes a whole board will be copied, regarding the board business. And you're not supposed to go around that requirement by using a non-member. The short kind of summary here is you should be talking about things that a board wants to talk about when you're in a meeting, or that a board has responsibility for when you're in a meeting. That's the right place to have the conversation. If you want to ask the chair to include something, just send that directly to the chair. If you have a 3-member board, send it directly to the chair with a note saying, please do not respond. This is for planning purposes only. Use email just for scheduling, or if boards or committees have staff, then for the board or committee staff person to facilitate getting this stuff out. And that's not going around the requirements of the open meeting law. It means they're allowed to send things out because they are not members, and therefore they can share their feelings, ideas, beliefs, and concerns with the body. And then this is, I don't even know if this is required that I have this here in the PowerPoint now. When I first started this, like blogs weren't huge, and so nobody really worried about things being posted online. But right now you can expect that your email might be forwarded, or a letter you wrote to someone, etc. And so I would always recommend limiting it to business, even if it's a friend of yours, and then be prepared. Are you going to be comfortable reading that in the newspaper or online? And if the answer is yes, then press send by all means. But if the answer is no, then you need to take another look at it. I always recommend the 60-second or 24-hour rule, depending on how you choose to interpret it. Give yourself a break. If you feel really passionate about something, don't press send when you're feeling that passionate. Just wait on it and see if you can make sure you're comfortable if that's out in the public. And then don't specifically ask for or express opinion. So this is, you're not going to say, I did the research on the electronic voting for remote representative town meetings. And what I found was blah, 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 blah. What do you guys think? That's a question. You're asking for a violation of the open meeting law. So I always say, never reply to all. Don't use email for substantive work if you can avoid it, and use email only for scheduling. I will tell you that every year I do one of these in a town kind of in the middle of the state, and every year the sewer commissioners sit in the front row and say to me, so basically, even though everywhere else in life we can go into a meeting uber prepared, we can't go in prepared for a board meeting or a commission meeting. And the answer really is that no, you can't talk about those things outside of a meeting amongst a quorum. And it's very easy to reach a quorum. For those of you who are new, you can get into a good habit right now. And for those of you that have been, sitting on boards and committees for a while, it's interesting to try and, consciously think about what the content is rather than just sending without thinking about it. So it may, some of this might stick and you might think about it differently. But I would recommend certainly that you're comfortable reading it online. And when I said something about limit it to business matters. This is because in one town, it's in many, but in one town, one individual wrote to another on a board. And in that email, they're friends. And in the email, the person that was sending the email was providing information about their mother's accident. And then the person who was responding was asking questions all in the same email chain. And so, it doesn't matter whether those emails are on your private computer, your private computer or your private email account. They're still subject to disclosure under the law. So if you can separate business from friendliness, that's always a good thing to do. I always say sometimes if you read it and you feel like it's a little stiff, you probably have the right tone, even though that's hard to kind of stick to.
Laura, may I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Just wanted clarification on deliberations by email. I think we all understand that you can't send an email and ask people's comments, but can you not send a draft document for discussion at the meeting and say don't comment before the meeting? Or
yeah.
Go ahead.
There's been a little bit of progress in that area with the AG's office, and so I think minutes they're okay with that happening. Everyone brings their changes to the meeting. For staff, it's fine. So if a staff is drafting something, they can send it out, no problem. But if it's your ideas as compared to, let's say, a decision was already made by the body on an application for something, and then you're just writing it up, it's not your idea. You're just writing it up. So you can send it and say, we'll talk about it at the meeting. Do not reply to all. Another option is if you're willing for the drafts to be public, there are some towns that do post the drafts of things that they're working on so that they have the ability to actually work on it, regardless of whether they're at a meeting. And by that, I mean, they can look at it independently, everybody can see it, the public can see it. So it kind of changes the dynamic a little bit. Otherwise, if there's a lot to read or to understand before a meeting, I always recommend that you just post the meeting for a half an hour earlier or 15 minutes, whatever it is, and use that first 15 minutes to do the reading and get your questions together.
Okay.
All right, I feel like we'll probably come back to this. All right, next slide, please. Okay, this is obviously newer than email, but at this point, it's not that new. There are risks of participating in social media if you are on a board about things that come within the board's jurisdiction. So if it's a 3-member board and 1 member comments in the comments, then the other members should not then share their feelings, ideas, beliefs, and concerns, because now we'll have sharing of a quorum. A city councilor once said to me, well, that's ridiculous. How are my constituents going to know I care? And I said, would you consider saying under the open meeting law, or I want to avoid a violation of the open meeting law, but I do want to encourage everyone to come to the meeting on Tuesday night where we'll be discussing X. So you can point it right out that you're not responding because of the open meeting law. You're not allowed under the AG's finding or rulings to direct comment to other members of your body. So you don't want to direct it at, if it's me and Tony that are on a committee with Peter, I should not tag them in my post, okay? By tagging them or, putting in a link to them so that they'll see it, that creates a problem. That's an intentional act of communication. So in lots of times, though, it is not really that. It's more that, people are they're running the same circles, or they run in different circles, and there's chit chat online. And so, you want to avoid, as I said, calling out the other members of your body. And if the matter involves something pending before the body, I always suggest to not engage. Why? Because you might have a feeling about that, but you're going to be open-minded and listen to what's put into the record at the public hearing on this application or development or whatever it might be. However, you said in writing ahead of time that you dislike this individual who's a developer, or that you would say yes to this no matter what they said in terms of it coming before you. So you want to avoid any possible due process issues. And that's why if it's in front of your board, my recommendation, and again, this is like the offensive, to be on the offensive, is just not to get involved. When you are putting comments in, you do want to be thoughtful about that. There are many situations where a judge will get or watch a copy of a meeting, or be provided with copies of phone conversations or feeds. So I would recommend being thoughtful about that. If you have a campaign website that is very active, then you might want to switch when you're elected to a different page. You can make yourself a new official page that you would only use for official business. And then again, the due process rights, it's important that we don't have to go to court to explain that you're entitled to a presumption of regularity, that the information you needed was in the decision, that just because you said something on a blog doesn't mean that you are, in fact, only going to act that way. Nevertheless, better to just avoid it. And the law hasn't quite caught up with this yet. We'll see what happens, but it took, I think, 30 or 40 years for the open meeting law to be revised, so it might take a while. All right. Okay, so let's talk about meeting notices. This is more on the practical side. A meeting has to be posted at least 48 hours prior to the meeting, and that does not count Saturday, Sunday, or legal holidays. Okay, it needs to be posted 48 hours. So it can't be like 47 hours and 20 minutes. That's not 48 hours. It has to be at least 48 hours before. The AG's essentially made committees do it over again, their whole meeting over again if they started early, because people may not have been able to participate. It has to include the date, the time, and the place of the meeting. We'll talk about that in a second. A listing of topics the chair anticipates to be discussed. So you're going to say, well, the place, we've been doing some meetings on Zoom and sometimes they're hybrid meetings, et cetera. You have an obligation to notify the public if there's going to be a Zoom meeting or if they are able to participate remotely. And by participate, I mean attend. So that information should be in your meeting notices. And if for some reason it switches, we wanted to do it in person, but the numbers look bad, let's go and do it online. You want to immediately update your meeting notice for that purpose. And or you could open the meeting and just continue it to a different date. Okay, topics that are listed have to be sufficiently specific to advise the public what's going to be discussed. And that is a very, very big change. It used to be that it was enough, and this is before 2011, so I'm definitely dating myself here. It used to be that you just like list it, minutes, blank, 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 and minutes, and then applications, old business, new business. That is not sufficient now for the AG's purposes under the open meeting law. So they want you to be very specific. They want you to, for example, list all the applications, list the addresses for the applications if it's zoning or conservation or planning. They want you to identify if you know ahead of time you're going to be talking about X, Y, or Z thing. They want that X, Y, or Z thing listed on the meeting notice. We have consistently felt that interpretation was, I could say incorrect, but I guess I will say not helpful. And it has really changed the nature of being on the town side of these meetings. Certainly, there's more information available to the public, and that's a good thing, but the town has a lot more work to do on its side. Okay, next slide. Okay, practical stuff. The clerk should stamp the notice when the clerk gets it to ensure accurate records exist. There should be an agreement as to how these things are going to be posted. So for example, in some communities, they're not actually filed with the clerk. They're filed by the, and I didn't ask here and I apologize. They're filed by the department head. And the department head's responsible for putting it up and making sure it's time-stamped. So if you're doing something different, fine. If you don't have an agreement or a policy, it may be worthwhile thinking about one. Very important, you can never continue a meeting from one night to the next unless the meeting is properly posted. So you would have had to post twice, once for the first meeting, once for the next night's meeting. You could always cancel if you don't need the next night. And finally, of course, notice under the open meeting law is not notice for anything else. If there's a requirement in a zoning bylaw or something that direct notice be provided to people, that would be considered abutters, or direct notice to a neighborhood, that also has to be done. So it's layers of notice.
Lauren?
Yes.
I did get a question. If there are two, and you kind of brought it up a little bit about what if you're going to a meeting, post it if you think you're going to ask questions. What if two public bodies are having a meeting on the same night together, a joint meeting? Does each public body have to provide an agenda and post it? Or if we just post them jointly, both public bodies on one agenda, is that sufficient?
I think it's sufficient as long as that's clear. The meeting is going to address the issues that are on the agenda, and both, it's a joint meeting. So for that purpose, I would say joint meeting, where the board members are just kind of gonna go to another meeting. As we said, they don't have to post it all, but if they think they're going to be talkative, they do. And at that point, they do need to post, because it's not a joint meeting. They're having their own meeting, just having it at that other meeting. Meaning if they're not planning to do it together, if it's not intentional, the school committee and the select board getting together to talk about budgets, or the finance committee and the school committee to discuss that. That's an intentional decision to do a joint meeting, as compared to gee, my board wants to go to that, I think they should post because they definitely like to talk amongst themselves.
Thank you.
Sure. I think we're ready for the next slide. All right, you have to write out all the terms. You can't use initials, so you can't say HUD or CPD or home. You'd have to write out the entire thing. You could do it the first time you write it out and then give it a shorter name to be used in that notice, but it has to be written out first. It has to indicate the time and date of posting. So the reason that's important is that if the agenda is revised, then it has to include both the time and date of the original posting and the time of the revised posting. It also needs to point out what was updated. So if, for example, the town becomes aware it can get a giant loan if it meets, tonight on X, Y, or Z thing, and that's posted and it's an emergency, they're allowed to do it. But in the meantime, a different emergency arises, they would update the meeting notice, time and date, and show why. So, sometimes people use an asterisk and bold, sometimes people do underlining, sometimes people put it in a box, but you just want to make sure people understand what was revised.
So Lauren, we have our committee submit a meeting notice through the website to the clerk. And when the clerk approves it, it goes on to our community calendar, which is our primary source of posting. It gets a
Date stamp.
virtual timestamp of, the town clerk posted this on X date and X time.
Yep.
If it's amended, we ask committees to submit a new agenda that says, let's say Board of Selectmen meeting amended. And that goes through the same process through the website. The clerk then approves it. The clerk posts it and it gets the new timestamp on the amended notice. So when you go into the community calendar, both the original is there and the amended is there. And each one have the stamp of when they were posted by the clerk. Does that work? Does that meet the requirement? Okay.
As long as they're both there, I think that's fine, but you would want to keep the first one because you have to show, what was the original posted agenda and then what changed and when did it change. So yeah, as long as you're keeping both, that's fine.
Okay.
And that's that last provision. Some towns do it the way you're describing it and others do it. They will literally, write online, put a star, whatever it is, and just update right there. So it already has a time and date. And I don't know if you guys have an electronic time and date stamp, but that's useful if you do.
Yeah, that's what
We do, and I think in the best interest of the general public, I would ask committee members or secretaries or chair, who's ever posting, that not only do they put amended, but possibly bold or highlight any additions or changes. So somebody doesn't have to go to the first one, the second one, the first one, the second one, but and putting the amended into the top title page will show that if somebody clicks on, now we've got two finance and advisory committee meetings on the community calendar. Somebody hits them. If one doesn't say amended, if they don't show any difference, and it happened today with a meeting, they say, oh, this is the same agenda, this isn't the right agenda. That's why when you do send in an amended, please put amended at the top. And I ask that you highlight or bold the additions or changes that you make.
Yep.
Look,
So-
can I follow up on that, Lauren?
Oh, of course.
Because I mean, we need 48 hours notice, and it's frequent that we're pushing up against the 48 hours notice, especially if the meeting is on a Monday or Tuesday. in order to really get the agenda set in enough time to get the notice posted within 48 hours. And one of the things that we like to do that helps in that process, but also gives people more notice for planning purposes, for their planning purposes, when we're going to have a meeting, is to put up pro forma meeting notices every other week with the Zoom information. And then when we get closer to the 48 hours, put up the real agenda, revised agenda. So do we have to show, I mean, that the agenda, the pro forma agenda was never meant to be an agenda, but do we have to show the changes from that to the final agenda, or could that just be disregarded as irrelevant when the new one is posted? I think
If it's not meant to be the notice of the meeting for purposes of the open meeting law, maybe consider just calling it something else. So it could be, reserve the date filing. And
Okay.
you are correct, in the past, you would file often for the year, right? Every meeting
Right.
notice so that people would know. And then as you got closer, you would update it. I think it's a little bit different now, because when you actually post, it's supposed to be for the meeting, not pro forma. So maybe you do reserve the date, or, planned meeting, check back for agenda or something like that. But probably you would need to update and put a date and a time on it and show what's new if you posted that as the agenda for that meeting.
Okay, so we shouldn't call it an agenda. We shouldn't make it look like a pro forma agenda. We should just call it something else. Okay.
Yeah, I think that works. And then, the first time that you file you're filing the actual agenda, and the first one
Right.
is just, what it is.
That's the original agenda. Okay, we can
Yes.
keep we don't have to, we can put the original Zoom information, keep the Zoom information unchanged.
Exactly.
To indicate it.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
So generally, Lauren, what sort of things are allowed to be amended within the 48-hour timeframe?
Yep. So those are things, and I believe it could be the next one. I don't know. The short answer is, if a matter was not anticipated by the chair, look at that. We're on the same.
I'm blindfolded, I told you.
Telepathic.
So the issue is one of degree, meaning, hold on. I'm gonna put on pause for 1 second while I close the door so we don't hear the back. It's good. I recorded that for all time on the recording. Okay, so essentially what it is the chair gets to choose what goes on the meeting agenda, period. And it's what's in the chair's head that matters. So if, for example, let's take my example of the grant information, and that actually did happen in a town where we're a council, and they had already posted their meeting. They didn't like to amend agendas, but if they didn't, they wouldn't get this grant. So the chair was very worried, and we said, you could not have anticipated this because you thought the deadline was in October. And here we are in the middle of July. So you could not have known. So you are allowed to update the agenda, and you are allowed to act on the updated agenda if it's something, under the law, you can act on it. The AG recommends that unless it requires immediate attention, that it be put off to a later meeting. I will say that from a personal perspective, I typically do think there's a lot of value in putting it off if it can. And mostly that's because you all haven't, had an opportunity to, to think about the issues. And if you're at a board meeting and all of a sudden someone says something, that you haven't thought about or that you're concerned about, then, the next thing that happens is that you're engaged in a debate with the public, or you said something that you would prefer not to have said. So putting it off until the next meeting or a special meeting is a good idea. If you can, it's what the AG recommends. But if something comes up that the chair didn't know about within the 48 hours, and the chair wants to, the chair can put it on the agenda, have the agenda updated, and talk about it at the meeting. A lot of towns, and just so I'm clear on this, I mean, if we're talking about the offensive and the defensive, the best practice is to wait because it's less risky. People don't understand the intricacies of this law, and why should they? It's as Diane said, I mean, I've been doing this for over 25 years and I learn something new every day. So it's a best practice. Does it mean that you have to do that? No. But what you do have to do is update the agenda as soon as you can, so that people who do look at the agenda later in the day are able to find it. Okay, emergencies. So this is a pre-COVID situation, because now, everything was an emergency for a while. But poor planning isn't an emergency. If you're gonna do something like, it would be a constructive grant if you don't act, it would technically be a violation of the open meeting law to have a meeting without posting the 48 hours ahead. There are times when there's a decision made by, the decision-making authorities that the risk of an open meeting law violation is worthwhile. But I would say that the only times that I've ever seen an emergency occur, a real one, that wouldn't get challenged or that wasn't able to be challenged is, first of all, the COVID-19 stuff. I mean, the information was changing every minute, let alone, every day. So that was one. And then there was a huge storm in Swampscott, and I'm thinking it was 2011. I could be wrong, but anyhow, the water breached the seawall and the select people couldn't even leave their homes, let alone get to a public place. So what they did is they talked on the phone, they did what they needed to do, which was really emergency planning. And then they posted a meeting for 48 hours after they thought they'd be able to leave their homes. And then they discussed it again, essentially kind of redid the meeting by summarizing it, and they added the meeting minutes to the new properly posted meeting. But hopefully there will be no emergencies that you have to deal with. All right. Okay, remote meetings is next. So we still have authorization to hold remote meetings. Section 20 of Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 extended it until April 1st. For those of you that recall, this law was extended in the spring. That's when it happened. And you might say, well, that's great. They thought about it ahead of time, but no, they talked about it at the legislature for weeks. They actually let the authorization lapse, and then they passed it a couple of days later with a ratification language. If you did hold a meeting that, remotely, it's ratified, validated, and confirmed. So I think, we'll keep an eye out near April 1. A town manager in another town said to me, I'm not planning any meetings in my town that week. I'm on vacation. And he was joking. He's like, he's on vacation because he doesn't want to have to deal with rescheduling everything and, dealing with whatever the repercussions might be if the authority lapses. I don't expect it will. I do expect we're going to get an extension. I don't think it will be a permanent extension because it's very political. All right, you can hold your meeting remote. You can hold it in person. You could hold it in person and remote. You can hold it however you want to right now. I don't know, Tony, if you guys have a rule about how town hall is used or town buildings, but the open meeting law doesn't prohibit that, different kinds of meetings.
So we have a question in the chat that asks, when the pandemic ends, where can our town committees meet? So what gives us the authority to what you just said, up until April 1st, the only reason we're able to meet through Zoom is because of the current law.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So if that doesn't get extended, then we will be forced to meet in person again.
Yes. Yes. And I think my personal perspective is that that is not going to happen because participation has been so much higher with the ability to hold remote meetings. At the same time, you know, there's a lot of people that find it to be very impersonal and that there really can't be the kind of debate that they want with their board members. And so they want to meet in person. Hopefully when the legislature reauthorizes, they just reauthorize the exact same thing.
So vice versa, right now, and should this extend beyond April 1st, we could meet in person if we wanted to, though.
Yes, you can.
So,
If you want to only meet in person, then you have to understand that that means no one can participate by Zoom. You have the ability to do a hybrid, which is to have both, you know, a Zoom link going, or some other kind of way to make sure that the public is able to see and hear. And so that's, you know, that's an option. Most communities I have seen a lot of interest in continuing. So I, you know, that's a decision as a policy matter that you all have to make.
so if I can just go a little further, take a minute while everybody's on the call here and expand upon that. You know, because of the pandemic, we have not allowed committee or board meetings to occur inside the town hall, even though whether they be hybrid or completely in person.
Yep.
Even though technically by law, you have the ability to do so. And that's
Yes.
mainly been because when you post a public meeting, you don't know how many people will show up.
Yep.
Yeah, and separately, you know, we have hosted some events in the town hall. You know, mostly those have been pandemic related. So whether they be booster clinics or flu shots or what have you.
Yes.
Or if they were, you know, if they were requests that, you know, where they were looking for an indoor space and they gave us a very thorough explanation of how many people they expected and how they were going to meet, you know, the guidelines of public gatherings under, you know, COVID protocols, we would entertain that. The problem with public meetings is that you have no way to say how many people are going to show up or not.
That's
You can't turn people away.
That's exactly the point. I think why a lot of communities have not. If you had a huge turnout at an in-person meeting and you can't, you know, make it safe for everyone, then you have to continue the meeting to another time, date, or place. And that used to be a problem under, you know, before COVID, because, you know, your conference room wasn't as big as, let's say, the you know, the parents who want to come out and support XYZ thing and they all want to attend. So, you know, you'd reschedule it in an auditorium. Here, it is an issue for various reasons, including that by only doing it in person, you're kind of forcing people to come in. And one of the ways I've thought about that over the past couple of years is, you know, I think when people feel safer, and, you know, maybe we've hit that now, maybe we hit it in a month or whatever it is, but people might want to come in, and, you know, that's great. But for now, if you do it in person only, you are basically telling anyone who could only participate electronically, remotely, that they can't participate. And so that has been, I think, the real kind of move between, for having the Zoom or, you know, other electronic town meetings of town officials.
And if you wanted to do a hybrid meeting,
Yes.
could you say the space in the town hall that is set up properly for a hybrid meeting can only hold X amount of people. So we will only allow, because of COVID protocols and public and social distancing. So only those amount of people will be allowed in person. Everyone else will have to participate remotely. Can
So-
you even do that though?
The AG doesn't like that, because they basically say it's all or nothing. However, they changed their standing to say that they could live with people who are on the agenda. Like if I'm going to be on the agenda, that I be allowed to be in person, because it's much harder to do by Zoom. So that would be allowed. I think until the town decides that it's willing to have its buildings open to whoever comes in, that there is a need to, really consider how to conduct these meetings. Once everything is lifted, let's just say in a perfect world, and I don't think this is going to happen either, that we never have to deal with COVID again. I mean, I am pretty sure we would likely go back to the way we were, unless the people who participate remotely have enough of enough support to have the law stay as it is. But you can only meet in an accessible place, so you can't meet at someone's house. You can't meet at a building that doesn't have an accessible front walk. You can only meet in places where the public is welcome, because the public, in fact, has to be able to enter the meeting in person, if you're doing it in person.
Okay, so thank you for that. I would say to those on the call, we're constantly monitoring, those guidelines. The allowance of having public meetings in the town hall may change as we get, as we see numbers decrease and vaccination rates increase, and the environment is set up in a way that we think you could do that safely, but we're just not there quite yet. And the problem with the town hall is the main hall, which has the biggest space, isn't capable for hybrid meetings, and the conference meetings downstairs, the conference rooms downstairs, the smaller spaces are set up for hybrid meetings. So that's the challenge we're facing. But bear with us, and hopefully we'll get back to that soon.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next slide actually does some of the same things we're talking about, and that is that the same rules apply at a remote meeting that apply to in-person meetings. There's no right under the open meeting law to participate in a meeting of a board. So there may be a decision, or there could be some other law that says that you have to have a public speak part of your meeting. That is not from the open meeting law. So just because it's remote doesn't give people additional rights that they didn't have in person. If you're going to do a public hearing, you have to take additional steps to make sure that the person that wants to participate can be heard and can communicate. So for that, they essentially have a right to participate, and they need to. This is the thing we were just talking about. The AG has said, you have to have enough room for all those who have a matter before the board to also be in person. That's brand new, just a very short period of time. And the last thing, which is what we had just talked about, meaning if you have overflow and you're in person, you have to continue your meeting, or you have to move it to a bigger place at that time. All right, next slide. It's good. I rely on myself to know these things, and then look, there they are. All right. So this is just a rehash because it just is really important. When a meeting is conducted virtually, the notice has to provide instructions as to how people can view and participate, meaning attend and hear. All votes in a virtual meeting have to be by roll call, even if the vote is unanimous. I didn't put this down, but the AG requires all cameras of board members to be on unless they don't have a camera. And as it turns out, it's not as uncommon as you might think. You have to name each of the members of the board, or have them introduce themselves right at the beginning of the meeting. same as always, you have to keep minutes and you have to, you have to stick to the rules in terms of what is and isn't allowed to be discussed at the meeting. All right.
That's
Let's
new.
go.
The AG requires the board members' video to be on if they have that capability.
If they have the capability, the AG likes the board members to have their cameras on. That does not mean that the members of the public have to have cameras on or be included like in a webinar format versus a non-webinar format versus this kind of a meeting.
You get much better reception with your video off.
Yes, I know. Some of this has to be dealt with based on practical reality. I think, before I said like, this is in an ideal world, this is best practices. There are ways to defend variations from these rules. And most of the time it's because it's not possible to actually implement them in a way that, allows the greatest participation in government. So that's a good point.
Is it possible?
All right.
Is it possible? I'm a member of the board here, Mark Cullen, and I use a portrait picture rather than a live video because I like to see myself 10 years younger than I am today.
Is it a bad sign that I have my
Is it okay
dog?
to put a picture up?
Oh, you can't see my dog here. I have a dog that I put the picture up of my dog. So if you're able and you have the capability, then that makes sense. If you cannot, then you cannot for the reasons that you described, but it's better. It's more, I like to say that if people want to have a problem with what a board is doing, that's one thing, like what they're acting on, the substance of a thing. I'd rather not have a board get stuck on the procedures that are used. So I always think, do what you can to comply as much as possible, open meeting, public records, conflict of interest law, because that way, when we go to court, we don't have to, defend our actions in the same way. So that is what I would recommend. Okay, this one, I'm going to say it. You have to say that you are broadcasting, or that it's by Zoom. If you don't have something like that, I can certainly provide you. And if someone else is going to record it, they have to inform the chair. It's much harder to do this on Zoom. What I've really been seeing is pretty much what you guys are doing right now, which says like you are going to be recorded, and if you don't want to be, you should leave. And the whole time I can see the word recording up there. So the chair should just say it. Individuals might also record, and you should be aware, and that's good enough. Okay, next. I want to get to minutes. I feel like executive session, I think, is much easier than it used to be because of COVID. People really have a better understanding that there's a procedure to go through. Basically, your meeting notice has to say you're going to meet in open session. You have to state the purpose of the executive session on the meeting notice. So you're supposed to disclose all the subjects that can be without compromising the purpose for the session. So for example, if it's a litigation update because of a recent court case, everybody knows that we're going into executive session to talk about the court case. So we can put that on the agenda. On the other hand, if we're considering, a stealth procedural approach on something and putting the litigation's name on the paper will alert all those who want to be alerted, then we wouldn't have to put it on. So it's kind of a case by case. If you're going to be in contract negotiations with non-union personnel, then if you're going to be in negotiations, then you have to say their name. If it's strategy with respect and you're not planning on meeting with that person right then you wouldn't. So there's, again, it depends on the circumstances. You have to take a roll call vote and record it, even just like you do normally. You have to announce whether the open session will reconvene because we don't want people to stick around if we're coming back just to leave. And then we have to keep those exhibits and documents that we used in a reasonable proximity. We can only discuss what was cited. If something came up, that was one of those things that we can talk about because the chair didn't anticipate it. The best thing that can be done is to announce that the exemption and the reason as part of the vote to go into executive session. Once you're in executive session, you need to stay on topic and all the votes need to be by roll call. We could do a whole day on executive sessions. Let's go the next.
I was gonna say, if anyone on this call, if your board or committee is considering executive session, reach out to the town clerk and she will connect you with our other town council, Dan Scripp. And the town will pay for that. You know, this is an important one that you want to make sure you get it right, you know, that you're stating the right thing on your agenda, that it actually meets the purpose of an executive session. And, you know, consider that a free consultation from our town council to help you, you know, draft that notice and kind of talk to you about what you want to go in executive session for, if it meets those requirements, you know, that criteria, and Dan will help write it up for you. So if you're thinking about it, connect with the clerk, she'll connect you with Dan, and this way you're covered.
Yeah, I can't recommend that more. I do think that executive session carries with it some risks, and the risks are that you're not in there appropriately in the session, and that anything you say or do in executive session will become public sooner rather than later. And obviously people say things in executive session that they're comfortable saying, but may not realize that if they're in there for a non-approved purpose, then those minutes will be public records. And you can assert public records law exemptions. It just creates a lot of drama that doesn't need to be had. That's my official legal take on that. All right, next, please. Okay, we already just talked about this, so
Okay.
let's go to the next one. All right, meeting minutes. What has to be in meeting minutes? The date, time, the place of the meeting, and the members present and absent. Why does it matter? It matters because years from now, will everyone remember who that absent member is? Okay, so that has to be in your minutes. Obviously, time, date, and if it's place, it can just say Zoom. If you want to put the link in because you're doing it electronically, great. This is the change, the 2011 change. It has to be that each topic is provided a detailed summary, allowing a person who wasn't at the meeting to know what actually happened at the meeting. Now, that seems kind of what's the word? It seems a little, I don't know, a little bit like, are we making work just for ourselves? You know, is this, are we doing this just because it's just another requirement? And again, this goes back to the purpose of that 2011 amendment, which was to make the public's meetings more accessible, to have the information be more available. And that applies after the meeting as well. So it used to be, we'd write open meeting law discussion, open meeting law discussion, potential use of executive session discussion, and tips and tricks for not violating the open meeting law. That would be enough. That might even be more than enough. But now you have to actually provide some context. So, for example, some of the questions that were asked would be in the minutes and what the answer was. You can attach and you should attach the slideshow notes, because that has a lot of the information in detail. It is without question, it's a lot more work. I always recommend that if you're the minute taker, that you definitely set up beforehand. So by setting up beforehand, I mean, use the agenda as your place to start And then you can leave a space under each of, if you're doing electronically, under each of the agenda items so that you can fill it in. And I was laughing, in one town, everybody knows what one selectman's going to say every time. I mean, it's so like everybody knows. And so when I did their training, I said, and you can even like pre-fill in the things that you already know, because people they knew what was going to be said. So that's a good way to kind of stay on track. Then you have to include in the minutes a list of documents and other exhibits used by the body. So physically present at the meeting, document is verbally identified, content is discussed by members. This is to avoid the situation whereby someone comes in and lays a very provocative letter on the table at the beginning of a meeting, and the select board, one of the members or whatever board reads it and says, not tonight. That notice does not have to be read into the minutes. It is not a part of the record. It was not discussed, even though it was physically present. So, whereas this document would be on the list. Okay, next.
And I think Diane may have sent out a template form. Diane, did you send that out to the committee members on a template form for meeting minutes?
I sent them a lot of things in the last 2 weeks, and I'm sorry that they got inundated with so much documentation and information, but I can resend it out. But I do like Lauren's suggestion to take, and I will say the planning board, Sheila Hamilton does it. She puts a roll call on her agenda and puts the name of all the people in the committee and leaves just a check mark, so that when she does her meeting minutes, or whomever does them, they just check that off. I think it's a great idea to take the agenda, put your people on there, and then this is what I do at town meeting. I take all the warrant articles and I put them on each on an individual page, so that when there's a discussion, I don't have to write the whole question in the agenda and everything. I just write under that agenda what was discussed. And I love that idea, Lauren. I think it's great for meeting minutes. I think it's easy, and I'd be more than happy to put together a template and send it out to anybody who wants it. But to answer your question, Tony, yes, there was one that went out. I'm not sure how many people have received it or used it.
Well, I just, I know meeting minutes can be somewhat of like a daunting task, and nobody wants to do them. And it can, it can seem like this really big job, but when you have them pre-set up, like you just suggested and Lauren suggested, it's not that bad. If you have it, you're just filling in the roll call votes, and, and then you have a separate page for general discussion.
Yeah. This is kind of one of those things where, practically speaking, there's nothing in the law that requires that it be done like that, but practically speaking, it also just makes it easier. And that way too, if the person who's taking minutes changes, but you have a normal way that you do the minutes, then they're presented in that same normal way, and it's less onerous for that new person to try and figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so open session minutes, they have to be created and approved, and the law says in a timely manner. The regulations say that it has to happen within the next 3 meetings or 30 days, whichever is later. So this was meant to deal with the requirement that they said people had to do it right away. And so boards that only meet like a couple times a year were meeting, and then they had to meet again to approve the minutes, and then they needed to approve the minutes of that meeting. And so there was like a domino effect in terms of their meetings. So this also, when it's a board that meets frequently, it means that you have a few weeks to kind of catch up and get those minutes ready. But the regulations do require that. So 3 meetings or 30 days, whichever is later. And then this is always important, and I always like to say it. You could argue that this is a public records comment, but I'm going to make it anyway. And that is that minutes of a public meeting, an open meeting, are public records as of the moment of their creation, regardless of whether anyone has approved them, regardless of whether you can read them. Because I know, for example, if it was me taking the minutes, no one would be able to understand them. They're unreadable. but it still doesn't mean they're not public. They are public records subject to disclosure. So for that purpose, if you're going to type your minutes, then that file, that document, it's public. If someone asks you for it right after the meeting, it's a public record. Now, do you have to do it at that moment? No, because you have 10 calendar days. But nevertheless, it is actually the case that they're public right upon their creation, even when they're not approved. And these are one of the only records that you can actually throw out. You hear how excited I am, that you can throw out without getting permission from the supervisor. So as long as you don't have a public records law request for minutes drafts, then you can just go ahead and throw away the drafts. They're done and move forward. So that's always welcome news. Okay, and then the 10 days.
After you've submitted a copy to the town clerk,
Of course,
hypothetically speaking.
hypothetically.
Do you need to submit those notes, I guess, to the clerk, or just the approved meeting minutes?
The approved meeting minutes.
Okay.
But if for some reason your board just doesn't get to it, then my suggestion would be to file the notes, because those are essentially the minutes of the meeting until further action is taken.
Right. Okay.
And to further that, once the meeting minutes have been typed and approved, then the draft can be discarded.
Yep.
Yes, exactly. Okay, and then the last thing is, under the Public Records Law 2017 amendment, you have 10 calendar days to respond to a request for records. If people are looking for minutes, it's under this law, the open meeting law. They did not update the open meeting law when they updated the public records law, whether they meant to or not, we don't know, but 10 days is how much you have, 10 calendar days. Okay. All right. The next one is about executive session minutes. And essentially, again, you'll get some guidance on this if you need to go into executive session, but you are able to withhold these for a longer time, provided that the executive session provision still applies. And the chair is supposed to go through and look at executive session minutes to identify whether certain minutes can be disclosed. So one of the benefits of the change to the public record, of the change to the open meeting law, was that you can now assert public records exemptions when you go to disclose minutes. It used to be, for example, that towns would argue, and they still do, that disciplinary records should never be disclosed because, of course, it's going to negatively impact the individual, but then the person who made the allegation doesn't get back and forth with that kind of stuff. So now a voluntary complainant or witness could have, the town could redact the name of a voluntary complainant or witness. The town could redact things because it's too private. And again, there's a lot of case law and a lot of administrative law about this. Very important to check. As I said, if you're in executive session for a non-approved purpose, that can be a little tricky. Okay, so you can either approve these minutes in an executive session that's properly noticed under exemption 7, which is essentially another law requires it, or you can do it under the exemption that you went into when you were in executive session the first time. It has to be on the agenda, and you have to have the dates of the minutes you're going to approve on the agenda if you know what they are, or as soon as you know what they are. And that goes for open session or not. All right, that's it. That's that one. We're flying now.
Yep, only a couple more slides here too.
That's right. Enforcement is in this climate difficult and unpleasant. I always say that the absolute best agenda that I look at from that other people have made in towns or in cities, it's still not right. And it's not right because the AG has such a high standard for what needs to be there. It used to be that the different district attorneys were the enforcing authorities, and they would say, what we would do basically is say, we had this allegation, this is what we want to do to fix it. Is that okay? And the AG would say, yeah, go ahead. I mean, the district attorney's office. But now it all goes through the attorney general's office. And it is the case that Martha Coakley came from Middlesex. She was the Middlesex district attorney for a bit. She was very rigid about the way that that law was interpreted. And they have now ensconced that perspective at the AG's office. So for things that I think are minor violations, the AG will say, you violated the law, you can't do that bad thing again. And you have to, if you do it again in the future, it could be an intentional violation and $1,000 fine could be issued. Public bodies aren't typically exactly the same for a long time. The clerk, if the clerk's aware, or the chair, can give a copy of the decisions applicable to that body to new people. But this is just tough. So if a written complaint is filed with the public body within 30 days of the violation, so it has to be filed with the public body. So it could be addressed to the clerk, but then sub-addressed to the public body. If it's sent, somewhere completely else, like to the town administrator, that's not a complaint that's filed with the public body. We have the ability to say that should be resubmitted. Whether to do that is a policy decision, because of course you could walk it down the hall if you so chose, but you don't have to. So then the public body has 14 business days from when it gets the objection or the complaint to meet, decide how to deal with it, and tell the AG about any remedial action that the town has taken. So this means not only do you have to have a response within 14 business days, but you have to have also had a meeting within that time, and the meeting has to result in some conclusion. So if it's a particularly dicey issue and you don't think you're going to get it done in 14 business days or one meeting, then as long as you ask for an extension ahead of time, the AG is typically willing to grant the same. For scheduling purposes, same thing. But you do want to calendar that as soon as you get it. And a business day is a business day to the Secretary of State, not a business day to the town. So even if you're not open on Fridays and Saturdays, if Saturdays are not a business date for the town state's purpose. But even if you aren't open on Fridays, that's still a business day for the purposes of complying with the open meeting law. And then if you don't do things to the satisfaction of the individual, then they can file a formal complaint with the Attorney General after 30 days from the date they filed with the public body. So it's multi-layered, it's no fun. Most of the time we're looking to defend potential violations. At the same time, it really is a learning process. And, my preference would be that is how it were reviewed, because there's a difference between making the same mistake over and over and over, seemingly to avoid complying with the law, versus stumbling onto something because you're a new chair or because you're a new member. Nevertheless, they treat it all the same. You have to, as I said, you have to write down when you get it and then count down 14 days after that, 14 business days. That's how long you have to get things done. The AG can also go straight to court. 3 registered voters can go straight to court. We don't see that as much. We definitely see, though, open meeting, public records, conflict of interest law counts added to lawsuits, particularly lawsuits about, oh, sorry, I forgot. Look, there's a slide, another one, particularly about land use issues where their rights have been adjudicated, which isn't a surprise. They're looking for anything to undo what the board did or a board did. And that's, again, why I really love to avoid any actual violations of the open meeting law. They might say, you violated the open meeting law because you didn't let anyone participate in the discussion. And that was, that negatively impacted my rights or whatever. And as it turns out, there wasn't a public participation requirement because you weren't in the, you hadn't even opened the public hearing yet. You were talking about procedure, that kind of stuff. So do what you can. And then cure. So you have the ability, if you realize, oh my goodness, we just violated the open meeting law, you have the ability to cure the violation on your own. You don't have to wait for a complaint. So that would be if, let's say we posted for 6:45, but in fact, all of us were there at 6:30 and we thought, you know what, let's just get started. And you do, that's a violation. It's not the 48 hours that you needed, and it wasn't posted for that time. However, you can cure it by at the next meeting, having a full and fair discussion of the issues on the merits, which often involves kind of going back over what the minutes of that meeting would say, and then adding those minutes to the minutes of the current meeting and basically ratifying, validating, and confirming the action that was taken. There's a few cases, and it's late, you guys can read them. There's few and far between for the open meeting law cases. Number one, you have to appeal within, I think it's 21 days. It is 21 days. And as we all know, sometimes it can be hard to even get a board together, you know, from within 21 days from the time that you become aware of something. So if there is interest in appealing any of these decisions, also bear in mind, the court gives the AG's office kind of the benefit of the doubt, the way that a municipality typically gets a benefit of a doubt when we're interpreting, you know, our bylaws. The court gives them the benefit of the doubt when interpreting the open meeting law. So the chances aren't huge, but it is possible, as you see. So we have won a few, and that's been great. But you never know, and better to avoid it than to wind up in a situation where you have to, you know, prove that what you did was not illegal. And with that, I think that's the end. Is that the end? Yes. So, Tony, did I miss anything that you wanted to cover, or Diane?
No, I think you covered a ton there, and I really appreciate, you know, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I don't know if there aren't any other questions in the chat. So if anybody on the call, you know, has a question, just unmute yourself and ask, or write it in the chat, or you have Lauren's contact info there too.
I have
Yeah.
one question. Mike Manning,
Of course. Yes.
are copies of these presentation screens available along with the disclaimer that you filed at the beginning?
Yes, sir. Yes, they are.
I have a copy of them. If anybody would like a copy of the presentation, just email me, and I will send you a copy.
Diane, I sent it to you in regular Word, in a non-PDF, so that you can print those as slides. You can do like 2 to a page or 4 to a page or whatever, just in case you were looking to save paper.
Okay.
And not have them be full pages.
So to add to that, if you would like an emailed copy, I'm happy to send it to you. If you would like a printed copy, email me and I'll print it out and you can come pick it up, or I can mail it to you.
And we recorded this as well, so that can be emailed out.
Well, I
link
appreciate
to this video.
I appreciate you having me tonight. I think it is always kind of a shock, and I'm going to use Diane's line now at the beginning of any training I do, that it is always a shock that you learn something about the open meeting law every time you talk about it a lot. And you know, the AG's office, they do issue decisions all the time on open meeting law issues. If you really care, you can go on and look there. There's, you know, some of their decisions written the way that they write them. And there's also some guidance, especially for town officials, on our website. We have a information link with public records, open meeting law stuff there. So
Just one thing, this is Judy. As this was a public meeting, why don't we just put this on our website? The presentation of the recording.
Sure, this wasn't really a public meeting, although we can certainly post a copy of this to our website anyways.
Thank you.
We actually asked Lauren that question ahead of time. Do we need to post? Is this going to be an open meeting law violation?
Right.
A training session is not a meeting for purposes of the open meeting law, as long as the board members don't deliberate. So there you have it.
No, but
And
it
we
is,
are not deliberating. This is the law.
That's right.
but it is a public record and it's of public interest. So we might as well post it as was suggested.
Yes, and Diane and I talk about this a lot. There's what the open meeting law requires, what public retention law requires, what the regulations say, and then there's going beyond that and doing our best to be as transparent and user-friendly as possible to our residents. So even though this might not be required to be posted on the website, we're happy to do that.
Thank you.
Tony, can I just say one more thing? So I just want people to understand, when I'm talking about these activities, compliance with the open meeting law, again, I present as though we have a perfect world. There are hundreds of open meeting law complaints and responses in our state. And, there are times when we argue based on a good faith belief that something is not a violation of the open meeting law. As I indicated earlier, it's just easier to not have to even address that. So by learning these best practices and, referring back, it can be a really useful tool to avoid engaging with, people who don't think that there's enough transparency. So I encourage you to read this and to read the other things, and also the AG's guide to the open meeting law.
And I'd like to just, it's sort of a rhetorical question to justify my existence, but all committees, I've talked to several different clerks as to, what committees they have. And we have, from finance to planning to Concom to sailing committee to Memorial Day committee, 4th of July committee, insurance committee. Do all of these committees, are they all required to meet open meeting laws?
This is a very good question, Diane. So any board or committee created under a bylaw or created by a statute or created by a public body, meaning a multiple member body, yes, all of those are subject to the open meeting law.
And must submit a posting of their agenda and their meeting minutes.
Correct.
Thank you.
Tony, it's Mark. I just want to, Lauren, thank you very much for putting this on tonight. I would say that I would guess that most open meeting law violations are unintentional, but legitimate. And, I thank you for putting this on tonight. And Diane, thank you for sponsoring this. And Tony, I think you guys have gone beyond and beyond above the what's required here. So thanks a lot for doing this.
You're welcome. It's
And
the open meeting law pamphlet that you all get when you get sworn in or join a committee is tedious read. Lauren's much more enjoyable.
And I, just to follow up on that, Mark, I thank everybody that's on this call. You guys are all volunteers. You guys are, taking time out of your lives to participate in this because you're dedicated to the town. It's optional and you're here. So, a huge thank you to you guys for taking part in it.
Excellent.
Okay, so yeah, we'll post this probably under the clerk's page. Thank you, Lauren, so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
good
Thank
night,
you.
everyone.
All right, bye now.
All right. Thanks, Lauren. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.